The 911 call came in at 6:42 a.m. A man's voice, shaking, frantic. "My wife is missing. She's gone, and I think someone took her." Police arrived at the Whitman residence, a beautiful suburban home in an upscale neighborhood. Inside, everything seemed normal. No signs of a struggle, no broken windows. But on the kitchen counter, officers found something chilling. A half-written note, scrawled in a hurry. It read, "I know what you've been doing. It ends tonight." David Whitman, the concerned husband, told police his wife, Laura, had never come home the night before. Her car was still in the driveway. Her phone was off. And worst of all, she had been acting strange in the days leading up to her disappearance. Something wasn't right. Had Laura run away? Had she been kidnapped? Or was this something much more sinister? As police dug deeper, they uncovered secrets David never expected. A hidden affair, a mystery lover, and a deadly plot that no one saw coming. This wasn't just a missing persons case. This was a crime fueled by love, betrayal, and revenge. And in the end, someone wasn't going to make it out alive. To everyone who knew them, David and Laura Whitman were the definition of a perfect couple. They had been married for 12 years, lived in a beautiful home, and seemed to have everything: love, success, and stability. David was a respected architect, known for his attention to detail. Laura was a freelance writer, often working from home, balancing career and family life effortlessly. From the outside, they were the couple everyone envied. But behind the smiles, cracks were forming. And David was about to find out why. It started with small things. Laura became distant, distracted, different. She stopped greeting David at the door when he came home from work. Her phone was always on silent, and she started locking it. She claimed to be working late, but her laptop was often closed whenever David entered the room. She had never been the secretive type, and now? She was hiding something. David told himself it was nothing. Maybe she was just stressed. But deep down he felt it. Something was wrong. And then one morning he found the note. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, written in Laura's handwriting. A simple sentence that sent chills down his spine. "I know what you've been doing. It ends tonight." David's mind raced. Who was she writing to? What exactly was ending? And why didn't she mention any of this before? He checked his phone. No messages from Laura. Her car was still in the driveway. Her purse was on the table. But Laura was nowhere to be found. Panic set in. Something terrible had happened. And David was about to learn the truth. David called her friends, family, coworkers. No one had seen or heard from Laura. But then, the police asked him a crucial question. "Mr. Whitman, has your wife ever given you any reason to believe she was unfaithful?" David froze. The thought had never crossed his mind. Until now. The long nights. The secret texts. The way she had been pulling away. Was Laura having an affair? And if so, who was the other man? As detectives searched the house, they found something that shook David to his core. A burner phone, hidden in the back of Laura's closet. Filled with hundreds of messages to an unknown number. And as David scrolled through them, one message stood out. "I love you. I can't keep living this lie. Tonight it all ends." David's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It was a betrayal. A love affair gone wrong. And worst of all, David had a terrible feeling about how this was going to end. David stared at the phone in disbelief. Hundreds of messages. Love notes. Secret rendezvous. And then, the worst one of all, "I love you. I can't keep living this lie. Tonight it all ends." His wife wasn't just having an affair. She was planning something. But what? And with who? David took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. There had to be an explanation. He clicked on the number Laura had been texting. No name, just a string of digits. He hesitated and then dialed. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice answered. A man's voice. "Laura? Is everything okay?" David's hands clenched into fists. Who was this? Before he could speak, the man continued. "Did you tell him yet?" David's blood ran cold. Tell him what? What the hell was going on? David didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he hung up and ran to the bedroom. Laura's closet, half empty. Her favorite clothes? Gone. Toiletries? Missing. But her purse, her keys, her phone? Still there. If she had run away, she hadn't planned it well. Something didn't make sense. A knock at the door. 2 officers stood outside. One tall, one short, both looking serious. "Mr. Whitman, we need to ask you a few questions." David felt his stomach drop. They stepped inside, taking in the half-packed bags, the burner phone on the counter, the worried look on David's face. "When was the last time you saw your wife?" David swallowed hard. "Last night. She was here when I went to bed." The tall officer glanced at the note on the kitchen counter. "And you have no idea where she might have gone?" David shook his head. Lying. Because he knew exactly where Laura had gone. To him. To the man on the phone. And now? She was gone. Without a trace. As the officers continued their questioning, a dark thought entered David's mind. What if Laura wasn't missing? What if this was all part of a plan? A setup? What if she had staged her own disappearance to frame him? It was crazy, wasn't it? David looked at the officers, forcing a shaky breath. "Do you think she's in danger?" The shorter officer sighed. "Honestly, Mr. Whitman, we're not sure yet." David's chest tightened, because neither was he. But deep down, he knew one thing for certain. Someone was about to get hurt. David sat in his living room, his mind racing. Laura was gone. The police were suspicious. And worst of all, there was another man. Some stranger who had been sneaking around behind David's back. A man who might know exactly where Laura was. Or worse, what had happened to her. The police were already one step ahead. Within hours, they traced Laura's secret messages to a man named Eric Daniels. Wealthy. Successful. A well-known business consultant with a reputation for dating married women. When police showed up at Eric's downtown penthouse, he didn't seem surprised. Or worried. Instead, he smirked. "Laura? She's missing?" He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "She was supposed to leave him last night." David's stomach twisted. Leave him? So it was true. Laura was going to run away with another man. But the question was, why didn't she make it? Eric's smirk faded as the detective leaned in. "When was the last time you saw her?" Eric sighed. 2 days ago. She was scared. Said she thought David knew about us." The detective narrowed his eyes. "And did he?" Eric hesitated. Then finally, "Yes. He called me." David's blood ran cold. The police turned to him. "Mr. Whitman, is that true?" David's pulse hammered in his ears. The call. The moment the man answered. The words that sent rage through his veins. "Did you tell him yet?" He had hung up. But now, as the officers stared at him, he realized that one mistake had made him their prime suspect. Eric leaned forward, his voice low and taunting. "I think David found out. And I think he did something about it." David's fists clenched. "That's a lie." But was it? Because if Laura wasn't with Eric, where was she? And why did David have a sinking feeling that he already knew the answer? The officers stood. "Mr. Whitman will be in touch." David watched them go, his stomach twisting. Then, his eyes landed on the burner phone still sitting on the counter. One last message sat unread. With shaking hands, he opened it. A single line from Laura. "Meet me at the cabin. No one else can know." David's breath caught. The cabin. Their vacation home in the woods. Laura hadn't run away. She had gone somewhere only he would understand. For what? And more importantly, was she still alive? David stared at the message on the burner phone. "Meet me at the cabin. No one else can know." His pulse hammered. Laura was alive. She was waiting for him. And now, David had a decision to make. Should he call the police? Or should he go to her first? Something inside him snapped. Laura had lied. She had been planning to leave him. And now, she wanted to meet in secret? David clenched his jaw. If she wanted to see him alone, then that's exactly what she was going to get. The drive to the cabin was long and silent. David's hands gripped the wheel. The same thoughts played over and over in his head. Did she ever love me? Was this all a game? Was she laughing at me with him? He checked his glove box. His father's old pistol was still there. He had never used it, never thought he'd have to. But tonight, everything was different. David pulled up to the cabin, his headlights cutting through the darkness. Everything looked still. But then, a light flickered inside. Laura was here. David's heart pounded as he stepped onto the porch. The wooden planks creaked beneath his feet. He reached for the doorknob and froze. It was unlocked. Slowly, he pushed the door open. And there, sitting on the couch, was Laura. Alive. Staring at him. With fear in her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Laura took a deep breath. I didn't know what else to do. David stepped closer. Do about what, Laura? Her hands shook. I wanted to tell you. I swear. But I was scared. David's throat tightened. Scared of what? Laura's voice broke. Scared of you. The words hit like a knife to the chest. David staggered back. You think I would hurt you? Laura's eyes flickered to his hands. David followed her gaze. His fingers were curled into fists. His entire body was tense with rage. And in that moment, he realized. He wasn't just scared of what he might do. She already knew. David reached for his pocket. His fingers brushed the cold steel of the gun. Laura saw the movement. Her breath hitched. David, please. Tears filled her eyes. For the first time, David saw guilt. Real, painful guilt. And suddenly, he wasn't sure who the real villain was anymore. David had come here to confront her, to get revenge. But now, standing in front of the woman he had once loved, he felt something else. Something he hadn't expected. Because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about betrayal. Maybe it was about something much worse. Something Laura wasn't telling him. And before the night was over, he would finally learn the truth. David stood frozen in the doorway of the cabin, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Laura's eyes darted to his hands. She had seen him reach for something. The gun. Her body tensed, but she didn't move. She just stared at him, her face a mix of fear and guilt. David's fingers twitched against the cold steel of the weapon. For a brief moment, he thought about pulling it out. Not to hurt her, but to feel in control. But then, Laura did something he didn't expect. She collapsed into sobs. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. David's blood ran cold. What wasn't supposed to happen, Laura? She covered her face with shaking hands. David stepped closer. Tell me. Laura took a shaky breath, her eyes filled with regret. And then she whispered something that made his stomach drop. I didn't mean for him to die. David staggered back. Who was dead? His mind raced. Was she talking about Eric? Had she killed her lover? Laura lifted her tear-streaked face. David, I made a mistake. Laura stood, her legs wobbly, her breath uneven. She grabbed David's hands, her grip ice cold. You have to believe me. I wasn't going to leave you like this. David jerked away. His pulse thundered in his ears. You were going to leave me for another man. Laura shook her head violently. No. Yes, I don't know. It wasn't about him. It was about everything. David's jaw clenched. He wanted to be angry, but his gut told him there was more to the story. And then Laura whispered something that sent a chill down his spine. We have to bury him before someone finds the body. David's breath caught in his throat. The room felt smaller, suffocating. Who, Laura? She closed her eyes. And then she said it. Eric. David's entire world tilted. Eric Daniels. The other man, Laura's lover, was dead. David's chest tightened. Laura's hands trembled as she pointed toward the back door. I buried him in the woods behind the cabin. David took a step back, his head spinning. This wasn't just a love affair gone wrong. This was murder. And now, Laura was pulling him into it. David had two choices. He could walk away and call the police. He could help her cover it up. His wife. The woman who betrayed him. The woman who just confessed to murder. David stared at Laura, his breath ragged. You killed him? Laura shook her head violently. It was an accident. He got aggressive, we fought, and I pushed him. He hit his head on a rock. I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. David's heartbeat slammed against his chest. Because deep down, He wasn't sure if she was telling the truth. David's fingers curled into fists. This wasn't how he thought this night would go. He had come expecting a confrontation. He was standing in the middle of a crime scene. And now he had to decide. Was he going to help his wife cover up a murder? Or was he going to turn her in? Laura reached for him, her voice desperate. "David, please. I need you." He stared at her. His cheating wife. A dead man buried in the woods. And a decision that would seal both their fates. Because no matter what he chose, there was no way out of this. David stood frozen, staring at Laura's tear-streaked face. A dead man in the woods. A cheating wife begging for his help. And now, a decision that could ruin his life. David swallowed hard. He had spent years loving this woman. And now, he was wondering if he had ever really known her at all. Laura grabbed his hands, gripping them so tightly her nails dug into his skin. "You have to help me. Please. If the police find out, I'll go to prison. They won't believe me." David's mind raced. If he helped Laura hide the body, he would be just as guilty. If he turned her in, she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Either way, he lost. But then, something snapped inside him. Laura had betrayed him. She had been planning to leave him for another man. And now, she expected him to save her? David took a slow, steady breath. And then he made his choice. David stepped away, reaching for his phone. Laura's eyes widened in panic. "No, what are you doing?" David's fingers hovered over 911. "I'm doing the right thing." Laura lunged at him, trying to snatch the phone away. "David, please. He attacked me. I had no choice." David hesitated. Was she telling the truth? Or was this just another lie? Before he could decide, flashing red and blue lights filled the cabin. The police were already here. And now, there was no turning back. Officers stormed the cabin, guns drawn. Laura screamed, turning toward David. "You set me up." Two officers grabbed her, pulling her hands behind her back. She kicked and thrashed, tears spilling down her face. "David, tell them the truth. It was an accident." David stood still, watching as they cuffed her. And for the first time, he felt nothing. Not love. Not anger. Just emptiness. Because he had just destroyed the woman he had once loved. And the worst part? He didn't know if she deserved it or not. The trial became a media sensation. The faithful husband versus the cheating wife. A dead lover in the woods. A story of betrayal, lies, and murder. Laura took the stand, pleading for mercy. It was self-defense. "I was scared for my life." The prosecution argued that she planned the whole thing. She had lured Eric to the cabin. She had killed him in cold blood. She had begged David to help her cover it up. And then, the prosecution dropped a bombshell. The jury held their breath as the prosecutor revealed a hidden piece of evidence. Security footage from Eric's apartment. The night before his death, Laura and Eric were caught on camera, arguing. And then, clear as day, Laura handed Eric an envelope. Inside, a life insurance policy. One where Laura was the sole beneficiary. David's blood ran cold. This wasn't just an affair gone wrong. This was a setup. And for the first time, David realized. Laura had never planned to run away with Eric. She had planned to kill him all along. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Laura Whitman, guilty. Laura collapsed in her seat. David stared at her, his mind spinning. He had spent years loving this woman. And she had spent years lying to him. As the judge sentenced Laura to life in prison, David finally let out the breath he had been holding. It was over. But was justice really served? Or had he just sent his wife to die in a prison cell for a crime she didn't fully intend to commit? Because one question still remained unanswered. Had Laura really planned to kill Eric? Or had things spiraled out of control? David would never know. And in the end, that mystery would haunt him forever. David sat alone in his quiet, empty house. The trial was over. Laura was gone, sentenced to life in prison. Eric was dead, buried in a lonely grave. And yet, David felt no relief. Only a lingering question. Had he made the right choice? Or had he just helped convict an innocent woman? 2 weeks after the verdict, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Just his name, written in Laura's familiar handwriting. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single letter. And as he read it, his heart pounded. "David, I know you hate me. I don't blame you. But there's something you need to know. I didn't plan to kill Eric. I planned to run away from him. That night at the cabin, he wasn't there for me. He was there to kill me. I had been trying to break things off with him for weeks. But he wouldn't let me go. He threatened to tell you about the affair. He said if I didn't leave with him, he would make sure you got hurt instead. I was terrified, David. I told him to leave me alone, but he wouldn't listen. We fought. He grabbed me and I pushed him. I swear to you, it was an accident. I wasn't trying to kill him. I was just trying to survive. And now I will spend the rest of my life paying for it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know the truth. Goodbye, David." Laura. David stared at the letter, his mind reeling. Had he been wrong all along? Had he sent his wife to prison for an accident? His breath shuddered. He thought back to the trial, the evidence, the way Laura had begged him to believe her. Had she been telling the truth the whole time? Or was this just one last manipulation? He would never know. And that realization haunted him. Because if Laura was innocent, then he had just destroyed the only person who had ever truly loved him. The case of David and Laura Whitman became one of the most debated murder trials in recent history. Some believed Laura was guilty, a woman who killed her lover in cold blood and tried to cover it up. Others believed she was a victim, a woman trapped in an affair she couldn't escape. In the end, only 2 people knew the full truth. And one of them was dead. The other? Locked away forever. David never remarried. He never visited Laura in prison. But every now and then he would take out the letter and wonder if he had made the worst mistake of his life. Because sometimes, the real killer isn't the one who holds the knife. It's the one who lets the truth slip away. What do you think? Was Laura guilty or was she a victim of circumstance? Did David make the right decision or did he just destroy an innocent woman's life? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love true crime mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe for more shocking stories.